Hello and welcome back to Market Shares. I'm your host, Tony Blodgett, and today I got to unpack this article. I was perusing through HousingWire, and as I often do, looking for what's going on in the mortgage and real estate industry, what might be an interesting thing to share with my audience. And you guys, this one really caught me off guard. We'll make this a quick episode, but you're going to want to watch this one because there is some, I'll call it misinformation, right? Misinformation about what's going on with housing inventory. So, we've talked about it here on the podcast. You probably heard about it, on the news, the headlines talking about year over year inventory continues to increase. And I think, this year over year, we're at like 9%, 10% increase, to the point where some people are saying we don't even really have a housing shortage anymore because inventories have increased so much. It's, shifting towards a buyer's market. But this article is going to shed a little more light on what's actually going on. And yes, that is true. There are parts of the country that are seeing a significant increase in inventory. But you guys, 36% of the states, 36 of the states have less inventory today than they did in 2019. And this article uses 2019 because it's probably the last time we had maybe a normal market, right? Just pre-COVID. So let's unpack this a little bit. I'm going to share a couple of these slides up here on the screen as we go through to illustrate for you what exactly is going on. So, as I said, headline numbers, 9% year over year growth in inventory, but that does not tell the whole story. So I'm going to pull up this map. Check this out. This really surprised me, which is why I wanted to share it with all of you. So if you look around the country, right, the orange states are the states that have less. The more orange it is, the less inventory it has versus 2019. So look at like Illinois as an example, down 68%. We see the same thing over in Connecticut, down 76%. Massachusetts, the Boston area. We see, states like Maryland, but even like, North Dakota, even California down 28, right? So it's really those states where we see, like Idaho, Colorado, Texas. We have a few others here. We have Oklahoma. We have Arkansas, all with Arkansas being the highest, 62% more inventory available. So what is the phenomenon? What is going on here? Well, it all comes down to a couple different factors. Now, let's just look at the example really quick with like California, right? So during the COVID, right, there was a massive outflow of people from California. Well, where were they going? Well, they were going to places like Texas, Colorado, Idaho, right? I mean, everyone knows there was this great migration, as we called it. So those markets were building homes and creating inventory for this massive influx of people they had coming into their states. Well, over time, that has slowed. The outflow from California has slowed over the last couple of years, and those markets that were the benefactor, that were geared up to take those people in, now have a significant amount of inventory available. There's a few other main factors that are driving this that I want to touch on. And I'm going to use Chicago as an example because the article uses Chicago, and it makes it really easy for me to pop up this data. This is coming from Compass, and I think all these graphs are from Compass. So we showed you the states. Take a look at Chicago. And what this has to do with is net migration for Chicagoland. So what it's telling us is that there is less people moving to Chicago, right? And you can see that with the purple on the top of this graphic. Less people are coming into Chicago, but even less people are moving out of Chicago currently. Now, that wasn't always the case. For years, Chicago saw a pretty healthy outflow of people. and they were moving to, the Sun Belt. They were moving to the Midwest. They were moving to other parts of the country. But we've seen that slow down. And what the article talks about is what we call the Great Stay, right? This kind of is in line with the lock-in effect that we talked about. Now, it's not all driven by interest rates. We kind of debunked that a little bit a few episodes ago. Like, is the lock-in effect real? And, to some extent, obviously, no one wants to give up their super low interest rate, but there's other factors driving people to not move. And what are they? Well, number one is affordability. So in order to move from a market like Chicago, as an example, where are you going to move to? And is it affordable to move there? So what's likely going to happen is some of these markets like Texas and some of the Sun Belt states and some of the states in the Midwest that have more inventory available, you will see prices drop in those areas. And as that spread starts widening, because home prices in places like Chicago are still going up. Why? Supply and demand, right? It's very obvious. There's no homes available, so those that want them or need them are going to pay a little bit more to get them. So eventually this delta gets wide enough and people start the outflow again, and they'll do it for affordability, right? So that's the number one factor, is affordability. Obviously, interest rates play into that. There's other things that play into it, but the driver is affordability. The second one is employment. There just has not been a lot of job creation. Matter of fact, I'm going to show this chart. This chart shows you hiring rates, just the overall hiring rates, new hiring rates, right? Look at it. It's at 3.3%. You guys, this is like a really low number. You would think just by looking at this alone that unemployment numbers would be super high. Well, they're not. We don't see a lot of unemployment. It's not high yet. It's higher than it was, but not high. But we aren't bringing on new people either. And it really takes that new job creation to create the movement in the market, right? Relocations, people taking new jobs, making more money, moving up as a result. So a lot of people are just staying in their jobs because there's not a lot of new hiring going on. So those are really the two big factors, is affordability and the labor market just being kind of stable, kind of flat right now. And so until those two things change, we don't expect a significant change in these numbers. The market's a little bit stuck right now. But the reason why this was so, eye-catching to me, and I think I would look this up if you have a subscription to HousingWire, or just study this map. I'm going to pop it up again one more time here as I'm kind of wrapping up this episode, because you got to understand your local market. We talk about real estate being a localized thing, and so many people watch the headlines. I bet you there's people in some of these markets saying, well, I heard it's a buyer's market now. There's more inventory than there's been in years. Year over year inventory growth. That's all we hear about in the headlines. But it's not the case. I mean, so like all of the West Coast has less inventory today than it did in 2019, right? So unless you're in areas like Idaho, Colorado, Texas, some of these markets, Arkansas, the Southeast is a little bit better, but not, 7% in Florida, 2% in Georgia and South Carolina. These are not big numbers. You get up into the Northeast and they're locked. There is no inventory in the Northeast. There is no inventory in Illinois. Missouri, not looking much better, right? So anyways, it's important to know your local market, be an expert in your local market. And if I were you, if I was a mortgage professional, I'd be going out and talking to the real estate community about this. This is information your realtors need. And if you're a realtor, of course, when you're meeting with sellers and with buyers, help them understand that the headlines they see are not necessarily what's going on in your market. And this was a great illustrator. You guys, I gotta be honest with you, I watch housing news and stuff all the time, and I was shocked by this. And I'm curious if you're shocked by this as well. Maybe put a comment down here if you're watching on YouTube. But look, if you find this interesting, share this episode with someone who you think might get some value from it. And check out HousingWire. They got lots of good articles. it is a paid subscription, so that's why part of the reason I cover some of these is because not everyone has access to this. But this one was interesting, and it just goes to show you can't always trust what the headlines are saying. You got to know what's going on in your local market, and you got to understand what's driving the things that are happening in your local market. And the more you know, the more value you can bring to your clients and your referral partners, the more business and relationships you're going to build and gain and maintain over your career. So it's always good to be constantly learning what's going on in the market. I hope this article was insightful and helpful to you. If so, please consider subscribing to the Market Shares podcast. We do put out a new episode every single Friday, something to just, kick your weekend off with some light listening. You can find us on all the podcast channels as well as our video feed, which is on YouTube. And until next week, you guys, take care.